The Iliad starts with, it's like some form of the word mania, or usually translated as um, wrath or anger, but it could be revenge, which makes a lot of sense. I think the Iliad starts with the revenge as 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 the first word, um, and Odyssey as uh, man or husband. So it could be husband. It's usually said to man. Um, it's like Andra or something like that. But it could be easily be looked up. But of course, it's actually the story of the return to Ithaca. So this is actually the story of the husband returning to the homeland after the war. Which was an important theme for the ancients. You know, that's why they had laws, for instance, against adultery, which Helen broke. Helen, who in the Iliad calls herself a shameless bitch. So she knew she'd broken this important thing, which is like when people are away at war, you're not supposed to cheat on the spouse. That's the basic gist of the theme, in a way. Or the reason the Trojan War started. But it's also the reason that perhaps Penelope seems as it were, excellent among women for having not broken this ethical injunction. And Euclid begins with the saying, the point is no part of the line. The point is not a part of the line. So we have this, one's about sort of maybe revenge, Achilles' revenge, other about Odysseus's return home to his wife, and the third is about number theory, or theory of the geometers. It's interesting. Epstein continually refers to Newton as the geometer, and as somebody who understood himself as a geometer. Usually, almost everybody says natural philosopher. Oh, Newton understood himself as a natural philosopher. Epstein says as a geometer. So I mean, these great works at the beginning of the history have such a wide-going themes. What should the theme of Heidegger's thinking be? So sort of in that context. So let's sort of try to struggle over that by looking at some things I was looking at the what is it called? The Fools and Wise Men's podcast, something like that, where the guy was talking about some stuff to do with Heidegger, which is strenuously, or as it were, they totally disagree with, and some stuff about William James, which I think could be demonstrated to be false in an interesting way. Maybe I won't do it all in this one section, but we'll sort of return to this because there's so much material. And he was making a connection between, and he was sort of superimposing Kierkegaard on the notion of Kierkegaard's version of what does he call it? Einstein? I don't think that's Kierkegaard's version. Where is it? Der Einzelnen? Einzelner? Der Einzelner? I think that's Kierkegaard's version is Der Einzelne, sort of like the single one. So it's partially, there's a reference there to, we could put it in this orientation, somebody that's part of a family, a single one, or one who's part of the Volk, or the crowd, as Kierkegaard is denouncing it. And so he's totally the knight of pure faith. This is totally knight with a K. This is totally Ritter, as it were. The singular thing. So let me say something from Heidegger for a second. This was written in 1933. So everybody is trying to translate Eigentlichkeit as authentic, which I think may have only really got translated that partly in order to ridicule Heidegger because of the Adorno book on the jargon of the of Eigentlichkeit or whatever. And partially because some people picked up on that for whatever reason, and it just became the usage, or just for no reason. Better, I mean, ownmost is actually better, because just the word authentic, it automatically sounds as though you're saying, like, oh yeah, I'd rather have authentic gold than pyrite, obviously. So any fool knows that. And so authentic automatically sounds like something good. So that's not how it should be translated. Heidegger explicitly said, don't understand me that way. And I think that links up to what Heidegger's writing in 1933 that I was about to read. So instead, I mean, it says there, Einzelne, wo auch stehe, at the individual, wherever he is, sort of in the, as the one who belongs to the Volk, counts for nothing, and das Schicksal unseres Volks ist in seinen Staat gilt alles. So this Fortuna, or this destiny of the Volk in their Staat, it counts for everything. So Heidegger's actually is not any attempt to connect Heidegger to this Kierkegaardian figure, even on that level, is wrong. Now, it's also, of course, it's wrong, meaning it's misleading. If you thinking about it that way is fruitful in some way, that may be very interesting, but it seems like it's better to actually understand what Heidegger said, because Heidegger's thoroughly and in an emergency type of way looked at all this stuff, and he's good at it. So this probably makes more sense to look at what he's saying than, even though it seems fruitful to bounce off the stuff like Zizek does and invent something else. It's actually better to see where Heidegger's guiding us. So actually, I'll probably do this again, like a second talk, because it's so much super compacted Schicksal pocket. It's too compacted with the destinal forces. So yeah, the question of this in Kierkegaard of the Weltlichkeit ohne Geist, or the worldliness without spirit, which really it points to the middle classes, to the sanctimony of the middle classes. That's sort of the orientation of Kierkegaard. He has his own special orientation, and he's thinking about that as against the the one who ignores the crowd for the authentic deepening of the. It's sort of like the interpretation is. The Catholics set up a thing which sort of kind of like the Mark Carney version of the old Western Alliance prior to Trump. It's sort of like, it kind of basically worked, and it's in some way it sort of ordered things in the world. So the Catholic institutions, when they break down, it becomes something like the Borgia popes, where people then say, look at this sanctimony, look at this hypocrisy. But the institution is still basically there, so you still think it's going to be reset. Trump will be removed. It'll be reset, like Bolton says. This is the attitude under Catholicism, according to Kierkegaard. There's the Borgia Pope, but that's the just the ones that have descended into sanctimony. But with the sort of Besant and the Y'all Street thing, it's very different. When they descend instead into worldliness. They don't become hypocritical. Instead, they become realist. That's the way. So Kierkegaard is drawing this line between saying, well, founded on the Catholic thing, facing in a different direction, we get this Protestants, one of the Protestant groups, or the Calvinists, or the Besant people, pushing this thing in Dallas. So that's the orientation for Kierkegaard. Okay, it's still valid to some extent. Don't know. I know it seems sort of like incoherent, but it's because I'm trying to put all the ingredients to the smoothie in, and I'm kind of throwing them in, and then if we could get to the end of this and see all the materials, then we could kind of taste the whole thing. There's just a lot of materials that seem like they should go together. Yeah, so that's a good orientation on the whole problem, the way I see it, all this material, which can be sort of like looked at again and then try to think through it again, because this is recorded and so on. What's the first contest between the individual, the family, and the community? The first big form is Socrates as standing forward as an individual, and then this is already a form of seeking what Kant later called the autonomy. The autonomy is the only difference between Socratic knowing that, let's say in the Gorgias, that to have wrong done to one, to suffer wrong, is not just in the mind, but ultimately better than to do wrong. This Socratic claim. It's the same level of claims Kant is trying to get at, but when he's talking about autonomy, autonomy was supposed to be just a list of these things you derive from the categorical maxim, because he has a mechanism, a generalized Überhaupt mechanism for deriving these things, where Socrates developed them the way that he did. Or put another way, Socrates it so happened at one occasion that this occurred to Socrates, whereas Kant sort of derived it from a principle, from all this notion of the generalizability of this rules of the so-called self for itself, or whatever Eichmann appealed to. I suppose I can appeal to the notion of the talk all you want and about whatever you want, but gehorzen, but hearken, but obey, which Kant is so famous for, and which in a way is the right to lie. It's the same as free speech. It's sort of exhortation for the right to free speech as the core of liberalism. That's one version. Strauss mentions it, but yeah, so Socrates puts forward this type of position, and then it gets thought in a specific way by Aristotle. And in Kant, we still have this connection to authenticity, and then Heidegger thinks Eigenlichkeit in the same place. But all these mutatis mutandis aren't simply accidental, but they're like total, these giant changes, including the German idealism about the question of reality as against the senses and against any specific distortions. Again, in other words, the Eddington's two-table problem, or some form of that, the Galileo's question of the primary and secondary qualities, or Locke's version, which is more famous. Yeah, all these changes has happened, but it's still supposed to be this thing sort of at the core of rationality. And then Heidegger has still a specific version of this position, but he's not saying necessarily that's better. How could he know that it's better? It's not. The refutation of Das Sollen is like exactly the same. So Sim will prove this. It's exactly this in his Einleitung to the Moralwissenschaft of the 1899 or thereabouts. That the status of the being, as Kant analyzes it, as what Heidegger would call ontic, being of beings, in Plato Agathon, the interpretation of the being of beings. So we get in Heidegger a specific vision of this Eigenlichkeit, which is supposed to be the point where we could interpret the law tables written in fiery stone of our being, in the sense of the categorical imperative in the maxim, as it would read out, almost like printed out of a machine. We no longer believe that's the position. We don't have any strong reason to believe that's the position, I think, in the Eigenlichkeit version, in the own most, or sort of solitary version. So now let's consider another fact. In Heidegger, Heidegger's version of the cave, it's not that like Kierkegaard, where you're sort of like go as far into the this pure beam of Apollonian light, and you just walk across it like a tightrope walker into the infinite remotenesses. This is somehow the Kierkegaard, the night of pure faith, because his idea is basically there could be nobody could know about this. Nobody could know that you were the Savior. Nobody could know that you were in direct contact with the Savior. Nobody could know that you were among, in Calvinist terms, the elect. Nobody might know any of this, and yet it would still be the case, and think how great that would be. So this Kierkegaardian way of thinking It's sort of like The Power of the Madman or something. But with the direct, claim to be the direct and true Christianity, because Kierkegaard says, there's a guy, sorry for going off at a tangent, but it's connected, is like there's a guy who had denied the Holocaust, and then he became convinced that this Butz, I think, is one of the big historians, and he had this notion of sink the battleship Auschwitz. We had to disprove just that one case, and that would be enough. But anyway, this guy who had sort of really believed it, but then his intellectual self-respect caused him to ultimately surrender it. He claimed to have proved that the Gospels were stories that appeared, and with specific names, were stories that appeared in some Vedas or some Sanskrit text, and I think it was a Sanskritist. And so he went to the head of the Church of Denmark, but it was in the middle of like an actual convocation. There's a lot of all the people were in the rafters and everything, in the pews. And he says to the head of the church, I'm confronting you with these facts. You're just pretending that the Gospels are the ultimate decider on the direction of the life of individuals, families, and the people as a whole. But it's on a bad basis. So he's sort of bringing an intellectual critique to the Christian thing. And then he's rebuked with the head of the church rebukes him with if you like, bon mot of Kierkegaard. Even if you were there with Christ before you, you still wouldn't believe. Faith is something different than evidence. Faith is something different than evidence. It's a basic thing. But likewise, Glaube. And it did seem somehow that I didn't get the formulation quite right, and I'm sure he said it much nicer in the original Danish and so forth. But it did seem that it was a strong rebuke in a way. Actually, it's a very strong rebuke. But what I want to point out is with all this divagation is that Heidegger is not trying to reproduce this whole atmosphere, this type of atmosphere of this contest between the Glaube and secularity, or put it better, between philosophy and revelation, the Leo Strauss problems. Let me read something by Leo Strauss, which is useful in connection to the Henry James stuff. Revelation cannot be adequately understood if it is approached merely as, in scare quotes, religious experience, in the sense of William James and other psychologists of religion. And then he goes on to say some things about how one has to actually understand these matters if one is to adequately address them, and as revelation, which is authoritative and which gives the ultimate direction to the whole of man's existence, collective as well as individual and familial, the divine law, the Torah, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's really just a specific example, because like if religion becomes generic, then Oberhaupt category, like Kant's critical religion, sees everything as just. So let's actually say what this Oberhaupt thing means in practice by giving a citation. Right? What I'm talking about, what it means really to see everything from the view of generality. This is it. Husserl's last book is all about this, how this view came in so tragically, the crisis of the European sciences. Religion, therefore, as I now, this is from William James. Religion, therefore, as I now ask you arbitrarily to take it, shall mean experiences of individual men in their solitude, in relation to whatever they consider divine. So notice the word arbitrarily. The point is, in order to treat with the matter, he's not going to the actual question of the matter. Instead, he's arbitrarily creating a definition, which then, if you keep to it, you can call that a science. But it's totally arbitrary. So, for example, like, there's a guy who wrote the book, from the passions to the emotions. So like passion used to have a strict sense that you could talk about the passions of the moon in a non-poetic sense, because passion meant the one thing and activity meant another thing. You're either the passion, it was to be acted upon. The passion means something's acting upon you, whereas the activity means you're the one doing the action. So this reproduction, the whom grammatology stuff, the original philosophers which came up with the notion of the things like the difference between the so-called mid-voice, this creation of the notion of the so-called mid-voice being split off into there's two voices. Yeah, so you have a lot of problems that are getting arbitrarily set, and this sort of corresponds to this philosophy of Überhaupt, or of generality that Kant brings in, and this is why the technological essence sort of takes the grip. But the opposite of you see the opposite of that is like, what was I saying? The passions and the actions are one way of looking at things, but then you could make all these different definitions according to what you feel like of different types of emotion, of empathy, make some fine distinction between empathy and sympathy, for instance, and then give it a specific content, define it. But all these things are inventions. They don't really come from, they're not the expression of the lived people. They're inventions of the grammarians, of the people that write this type of books. And so, who's actually the one that, in that case, that's actually a biologist. So it's like a biologist and psychologists and other people that study things that have to do, that could be explicated in terms of emotions and then in terms of fine point distinctions like sympathy and empathy. I don't know, I suppose that's more the province of psychologists, but it seems like it comes in also for zoology, biology, or whatever. But you see, these things are, it's just that they're arbitrary. They come out of nowhere. They don't grow out of the the daily usage, as did the first discussions with Plato and Socrates. So Heidegger has this going up and down version between this lone individual between the Eigenlichkeit. But Eigenlichkeit doesn't mean, it just means your own actual direct experience, sort of, rather than how it would be sort of leveled down and interpreted by a general Grok version or something. It means something more like that. Or that certain things, everybody says them, and it's part of the folk or something, which could be false. Like, I don't know. It's like everybody says, like, used to say, like, certain landmarks are visible from the moon or whatever with the naked eye or whatever on the Earth, with only a few. And there's lots of things that everybody seems to know like that, but they may be wrong, they may be right. Heidegger's view is there's a constant sort of vehiculation, if you like, between these two realms. So he doesn't actually see, as one might be tempted to, he doesn't see things in this Kierkegaardian way, just on this level of sort of the Das Sollen type of questions, or the Ach type of questions. He doesn't put them into that type of register. But in fact, he sees that this can go back and forth as something, in a way, almost productive, I suppose. In any case, it doesn't chiefly bother him or concern him. So I think one has to sort of, like, kind of safely say Heidegger is not telling people to be eigentlich or authentic. He's observing that there's this two sort of transitioning different zones there. Where Kant is saying, oh, we could make... See, Kant's idea is, we found out there's all these other planets. He's kind of thinking like Elon Musk. But then he thinks there must be other races. He thinks of the other races as being human, basically humans like us. He doesn't think of aliens in the way we do, because he doesn't have the idea of evolution. But he basically thinks, maybe he did know of evolution, but I don't think it touched on his notion of the other races on the other planets that he thought must exist because of the great vast numbers of planets. His idea is the other planets, the chief difference between us and them, because he doesn't think in terms of technological advances so much or anything else, or changes in the obvious environment. But he just thinks the moral level must be different on the different planets. That must be the main difference. And then his idea is that since the moral level can change, why not immediately point ourselves towards the maximum? And thus this debate he had about whether one could ever lie or break a promise. It's sort of there's a Derrida did something about the promise. I think it's sort of in connection to that. So we have historical direction then. So that's, in Kant, we're talking about historical direction, just as Ibsen and Strindberg in debating over the women entering the professions is a matter of historical progression or so-called progress or non-progress. Just as the questions in another context of the economic development are considered questions of development or progress, different directions. You see, this whole field of analysis, this whole storm of historicism and presentism, that's directly what Heidegger is actually combating, so that we can't that we can't read Heidegger correctly if we see him, in that sort of those kind of contests between return or progress, or between right and left wing, or this kind of notion of the movement of history, and also basically this question about how Heidegger reads Geist in the Hegelian way, and what it becomes in his thinking is of some interest and unclear. Okay, let's just leave it at that for a second. I was just trying to show sort of like back and forth between the Eigenlichkeit or authenticity and the inauthenticity in different versions, and then try to suggest that Heidegger, sort of like Socrates, he doesn't really want to go to the height of the the height of being some kind of strange individual, like Hermann Hesse or something like that, strange individualism. He doesn't think that's the maximum of Eigenlichkeit. He thinks something more like Socrates, who always stayed with the people in the cave. Even if he ventured out, basically he said, I'm one of you, I stay in the cave. And when they decided to act, that's the point of when they executed him, but then they repented, and then they said he was one of us, and they realized it. So he stayed in the cave. This is part of the point of what Heidegger's saying. So I think insofar as one looks at the so-called authoritarian countries, these are sort of Socratic countries. There's ones where the leader still says, I'm as vulgar as you are, and I stay in the cave. But that needs to be sort of allowed to be unfurrowed further, but to do justice to the whole idea that's behind that. But let's just prepare these ideas for a later time. But I want to just show, I guess the last theme I'll just mention is, the mirrors, the so-called wilderness of mirrors, by which the different countries and the way they do things are presented in a way that's it could be communicated to the other side more clearly what sort of, or at least it could be sort of argued to them more clearly what it is they're not seeing that's good in the other side. Like for instance, I guess the notion of collectivism versus individualism, I think, is totally the whole theme of everything we were just saying. And the preference for the one over the other can be presented in totally different guises, totally different beautiful metaphors and literature and intellectual presentations, so that depending on, so there's not a lot sung for the so-called collectivism in the countries that are individualistic. So this, of course, they have this view of how bad it is. But I think one could see, let me just leave it at this as one suggestion of the problem, is for a collectivist attitude, the notion that the individual means counts for nothing. This goes for everyone. It's not that it doesn't, it goes for everyone. And then that the state, it's not that there's somebody that gets the better of that. And then the notion is when you have a great genius, say a Nietzsche, for instance, this is how Hitler thought about Nietzsche. This is an expression of the vote. He's the expression of he's the literal expression of the vote. So that he's in himself is nobody. He's just a one guy that counts for nothing. But this is the actual, fostering the genius is the actual expression of the collective. That's the point. So there's a lot of points where it's, it's not understood what the selling points are when disclosed, verbally like this. It's often thought, they only are like that because of some deep psychological problems in their youth or something, or they're only attracted to that because of some arbitrary characterological reason.